Tonight, could a US-UK trade deal be sealed in a matter of months? It's understood that leading members of Team Trump think it is a possibility. We'll hear from a former UK Trade Secretary who tells us a lot of the work has already been done. As for US-China trade, well, that is looking rockier. China's retaliated against the tariffs by bringing in some of their own. We'll look at the impact. Also tonight, a group of medical experts claim there is no evidence the former nurse Lucy Letby murdered babies. Her lawyers are now calling for an investigation. New tonight, Sky News understands the government will make the law tougher for unlicensed drivers after a campaign by the family of a teenager who was hit by a car that didn't stop. And Rupert Murdoch pops into the Oval Office to meet the President of the United States. But as we'll see, it's not for the first time. Popping into my office tonight, Caroline Flint and Daisy McAndrew, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Now, you might be expecting us to start the programme with trade wars tonight. Donald Trump has imposed a 10% tariff on goods imported from China. He's threatened the EU is next in his sights. Now, of course, we will discuss that later on the show. But actually, I want to start the programme talking about a possible trade deal. Not just any trade deal, the trade deal. You know, the one between the US and the UK, the one politicians over here have been banging on about since Brexit. Because a lot of people who know a lot about trade negotiations seem to think that it might finally get over the line. In fact, we're hearing that leading members of the Trump administration believe it could be sealed in a matter of months. Now, first, let's get back to basics. When the UK left the EU in January 2020, one of the biggest Brexit benefits was the ability to strike our own trade deals. The US, of course, would be the biggest prize, so negotiations started pretty much straight away in May 2020 with a guy called Donald Trump. You might have heard of him. He was the president of the United States at the time. But when Joe Biden entered the White House in 2021, well, things stalled. The Biden administration, they weren't happy with the way they believed the Northern Ireland Protocol was being used as a political football, and frankly, striking a trade deal with the UK wasn't a priority. You know, they were worried about the domestic economy. So the UK, under Trade Secretaries Liz Truss, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, remember that name, and also Kemi Badenoch, started trying to strike a load of separate agreements with individual US states. Right, fast forward to 2025, enter Donald Trump, round two. He's president again, and he's got a new favourite word.
Tariffs, it'll be placed on them, and other sanctions, but the tariffs, I told you, most beautiful word in the dictionary.
Well, he's slapping that beautiful word on countries all over the place, or at least he's threatening to. So why would he strike a trade deal with the UK? Well, this is the thing. What Donald Trump really, really hates is being in a trade deficit. In other words, where the US buys more goods from a country than it sells to them. So China, bad. EU, bad. Canada, bad. Mexico, bad. The UK, actually quite good. There isn't really a deficit at all. So the economics for Trump makes sense. And, you know, I don't need to explain why for both Trump and Starmer, there could be political advantage to a trade deal as well. Now, according to Anne-Marie Trevelyan, International Trade Secretary #2, there could be an oven-ready deal that's good to go. One she negotiated before it was all put on ice. Now, we'll hear her interview with Sam Coates shortly. Although, one last thing. You know, this isn't the first time we've been promised an oven-ready deal. Remember Boris Johnson's oven-ready Brexit deal? You know, the thing that matters in negotiations and deal-making is the detail. So there's no point celebrating an oven-ready deal until we know a bit more about what ingredients are in it. Well, we mentioned his interview earlier on. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, is here with me. So tell us about what you've learned.
So we start from the position that we believe there are members of Trump's administration right now going around saying that they want to do a deal with the UK within months. That could potentially be even faster than Keir Starmer gets a deal to overhaul the post-Brexit deal we did with the European Union. The stakes are high and big choices have to be made. Is that feasible is the question. Well, where better to turn than the person who oversaw negotiations on a trade deal with the US the last time that Donald Trump was in the White House. So you've mentioned her name, Anne-Marie Trevelyan. I've been speaking to her earlier today because she did and oversaw quite a lot of the negotiation. Quite a lot of that is basically done, should Keir Starmer want to pick up her work and run with it from there. So I started by chatting to her about exactly what her and under Boris Johnson got done. Sky News has heard that there are senior figures in the Trump administration saying right now that they want a trade deal with the UK within months. You've been Trade Secretary. Is that possible?
Well, I think that's really exciting, and I hope that's the case because, as I say, I was the Trade Secretary just at the end of the first Trump administration, and we had already been moving discussions probably about halfway there in terms of the trade negotiations. A trade deal with anybody is a big document. With America, obviously enormous. So lots and lots of chapters, lots of areas of potential.
So you were negotiating with the Trump administration a UK-US trade deal.
Yes, that was ongoing at the time.
And you've been doing it for how long?
So I came into post just in the September, but it had been running, I want to say to you, probably 18 months before with my predecessors. I might not be quite right, but it was well advanced, and the relationships were really good. The negotiating teams were, well embedded. It's a very complicated thing, a trade deal, to pull together, and it takes a huge amount of, work by lots and lots of people across both countries. But of course, it ground to a halt because President Biden wasn't interested in international trade at all.
I just want to understand what Trump's American team's goal is with a trade deal. What are they asking for? What markets are they trying to open up for American companies? What concessions did you give? What benefits would there be from the stuff that you'd nailed down, the stuff that you'd already negotiated?
The UK-US trade deal would be a big, punchy, broad-ranging trade deal. I think what's important is, what are we good at? What's the UK good at? What do we want to be able to do more? Our financial services, second only in the world to the US. Fantastic. Lots of things where we don't crash into each other. Really important for success in a trade deal is where you get that complementarity. What is it that the US has that they want to sell to us that, isn't of concern to us? So some of the conversations with California around some of their nuts and produce like that. So there's all sorts of different pulls and pushes that you work together as a whole.
So it's so interesting, Sam, because it feels almost counterintuitive that this deal that's been almost impossible for so long could finally be a real possibility. But it's the detail that's going to matter, right? Because there's an awful lot of thorny issues in any trade deal between the US and UK, right?
That's right. And in a moment, Anne-Marie Trevelyan will explain why actually it could take longer with the EU, because decision-making there is harder. But you talk about the detail, and of course, actually, a trade negotiation is about thousands of lines of where you set tariffs to zero or to another rate, and it's an incredibly complex specialist task. But I think it's the politics that could get this over the line and end up being more important than the detail. For this reason, what we've seen over the last, what are we now, Tuesday, over the last 4 days, is Donald Trump picking on a succession of world leaders, the leaders of Canada, Mexico, China, basically putting each one of them on a naughty step and then taking them off if they do what they want. That's broadly where we are in this rather Wild West nature of global diplomacy right now. But you can't... Do you think that you could actually conclude a UK-US trade deal before you conclude the renegotiation of our current trade deal with the EU?
So there's a question maybe we should take bets, Sam. I think realistically, because of the way Trump works, which is transactional but very determined, he'll take decisions, big decisions. I think absolutely that's possible. I think the challenge with anything with the EU is that you're dealing with, multiple countries who all have to agree. And the challenge with any trade deal, which is why the TCA took a long time to negotiate to the level that we got, is that everyone's pulling a little bit differently. So it's hard to land something that works for everyone. It's a renegotiation, and there will be issues like fisheries to come up, which are always a source of contention with the EU deal. I hope both can be achieved quickly.
We often talk about a UK-US trade deal as a big thing, but do you think it's possible to just do a smaller deal, mini deal that leaves out things like agriculture and food?
Absolutely. The opportunity to land, if both sides want the deal, whatever size and shape it is, then that's a deal to be made. And I think Mr. Trump, of all people, is all about making deals.
So why would America leave out agriculture for a deal when agriculture and selling American food produce into the UK market was presumably one of the big wins? Well, I think it's precisely for that reason, for the politics, because Donald Trump has now named the guilty parties, the naughty parties, are not doing what he wants, or maybe taken tariffs off when they have. But he does need an example of a well-behaved leader to contrast with all those people that he's having fights with all around the world and all around the Americas? And could Keir Starmer, who gets a notably different write-up from Donald Trump to every other world leader that we talk about, that he talks about, be exactly that person? Could he be the beneficiary because Donald Trump needs a good example of a good people who does what he wants? That's why the politics of this are really, really intriguing.
Donald Trump and Keir Starmer, who would have thought it? Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there, Deputy Political Editor. Right, let's speak now to Lord Kim Darroch, the former UK ambassador to the United States. And we've been talking about a UK-US trade deal. Do you think it could actually get over the line?
Sophie, I think a limited deal, perhaps on digital trade, one or two other things, maybe financial sector, is a possibility. But I kind of question whether Donald Trump is really the sort of transactional negotiator who will give us all the things that we would like, but not have very much in it for the United States. Now, Donald Trump thinks pretty much every farmer in America votes for him. And to be frank, a lot of them do. When we tried to do a deal, free trade deal, when I was in Washington between 2016 and 2019, agriculture, complete access for US agriculture, was number one on the US list of demands. So it would be a big, big change from go to that, to go from that to a position where they're prepared to say, we understand you have problems with our agriculture and you don't, it all undercuts your stuff and this kind of thing. That's fine. We'll just do a deal in the areas that are good for you and not for us. I find that a stretch, to be honest.
It's interesting, isn't it? So the idea of a trade deal, absolutely, what's wrong with that? But is it a trade deal that we would actually want? That's the question.
Yeah. The other thing here is there are two big regulatory regimes in the world. One is the American, and the other is the European, the EU. And at the moment, we are still basically aligned with the US, with the EU. I mean, we don't allow American agriculture, and the EU does not, which is one of Trump's big complaints about the European Union. And we do basically a balanced trade package with the US. They sell about as much to us as we to them. But we do more than twice of our trade with America we do with Europe. So I think that national interest suggests we should stay inside the EU regulatory regime, and we're going to continue to do the bulk of our trade, maybe twice as much with the EU as we do with the US. So again, I think one of the objectives for the Americans would be to pull us into their regulatory system. And again, I just don't see where that's in the UK national interest.
I mean, I guess, I remember a few years ago a policy exchange report that blamed you for the lack of progress in a UK-US trade deal when you were US ambassador because you failed to adjust swiftly enough to Brexit, apparently. I mean, is this all, this doubt because you're not a true Brexit believer?
I mean, I'm not a Brexit believer. And, I think the evidence is piling up that maybe it wasn't the best move in British history. But this isn't about Brexit. I mean, there was an offer on the table from the Americans between 2016 and 2019 to do a free trade deal with us. It was negotiated by trade negotiators from London. And the government at the time took the decisions on what we could accept and what we didn't accept. And they were not prepared to accept opening up the UK market to agriculture. Nothing to do with those of us in the embassy in Washington. That was the British government's view at the time. And, will that be the view again with this government? If that is the top of the US list of demands, if we go down this track, let's see. I'm just saying it would be a real surprise for me if the Americans drop that demand.
I'm keen to widen out the conversation a little bit at this point. Donald Trump's threatened tariffs imposed tariffs on China, Canada, Mexico, the EU. You're someone who's seen Donald Trump up close. Do you think he's serious about these tariffs, or is this all part of, I guess, a wider negotiation tactic?
Yeah, but first of all, I think tariffs are Donald Trump's preferred instrument of coercion. He sees them as a way of getting what he wants from his international relationships. And it's a very, very profoundly transactional politician. For him, it's all about America first, advantage for America. Second, these are not new views, Sophie. He's had them for 40 years. If you can go back and find things that Donald Trump has been saying out there on the internet, on YouTube, for 40 years, that America should be putting tariffs on imports to achieve more parity in trade and to achieve its international objectives. And it's not just about in the trade context either. I mean, he uses tariffs, as you saw with Colombia, to force them to take undocumented migrants back. And he's using them with Canada and Mexico over supposed supplies of fentanyl across the border and also about undocumented migrants. So he absolutely believes this is the way to get his objectives. And the way he does it is you put the tariffs on first, or you threaten that you're about to put them on, give them maybe 2 or 3 weeks to respond, and then you do it, as he's done with China. He's not a guy who kind of floats them up in the air somewhere for months and months and months while you negotiate something. He says, tariffs on first. This is the art of the deal. It's all in his book.
We should read it. The art of the deal, there you go. And just finally, there's been reports today the UK government is keen to push through the Chagos Island deal, giving sovereignty to Mauritius. What's your view on this? Is this a sensible strategy from Keir Starmer, and how do you think it will go down in the White House?
I do think it's a sensible strategy. I think it's basically the only sensible strategy that was available. And the point about the deal that's been done is it protects Diego Garcia, which is our national security interest, and the American national security interest here. I don't think we could have done nothing because we believe in international law. We have the whole of the UN voting against us. We have international courts ruling against us. So we had to do something. And I know there are reports from Washington, I mean, people saying this in the British Parliament, that the Americans are against this. So far, I've not seen a pronouncement from the White House. I've seen people who are briefing unattributably that they don't like it. There isn't anything else, to me, it seems, available. And we've protected Diego Garcia with this deal. So I would hope that the Americans would see the logic of this.
OK, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much for being on the programme today.
Thanks.
Well, we've been talking an awful lot about the possibility of a UK-US trade deal, but the opening salvos in what could be a trade war between the US and China have been fired. President Trump introducing a 10% tariff on Chinese imports, and Beijing announcing their own tariffs on American goods. Let's take a closer look at this now with our data and economics editor, Ed Conway.
This is a fast-moving story, isn't it? Donald Trump and his tariffs. Let me just give you a recap of where we are at the moment. So obviously, this is where those tariffs were before Donald Trump came into office. Very, high on China comparatively, low on Mexico and Canada. He said there were going to be 25% extra tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and also an extra 10% on China. But then, lo and behold, we all know what happened next. Calls were made, the President of Mexico, Prime Minister of Canada, and they were paused. So they went away. But those 10% are still there, and actually China has retaliated with extra tariffs on the US, although not due to come in next week, which raises a question. Are any of these tariffs actually being paid yet? It's kind of an interesting question, actually. It's worth just delving into. Because if you look at the small print, OK, so this is the executive order from the White House about these Chinese tariffs. We'll zoom down here and have a look at this. It says that basically they take effect on or after 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time, February the 4th, 2025. So they should already be in place. But here's the thing. Look a bit further down in the small print and you see this. Goods loaded prior to February the 1st shall not be subject to such additional duty. Now, that matters, OK? Because if you're looking at how goods are actually coming in from China to the US, this is breaking it down by ship and by air. The vast majority actually come in by ship. 70% come in by ship. And obviously it takes time after you're loading stuff for it to actually arrive in the US. How much time? Well, it differs depending on the route you're talking about. But for a route like from Shanghai to LA, well, more or less the minimum, this is basically the fastest you could get across there, the minimum is around about 15 days. OK, so think about it. If you're loading something just after that deadline has passed on the 1st of February, that shipment is only going to be around about there at the moment. And it's going to take quite a long time for it to arrive in LA, possibly the 16th of February, maybe even later. So you see, a lot of these tariffs haven't yet actually been imposed. However, of course, there is that 30% coming in by air, raising the question, what are the kinds of things that have already come in by air? Well, if we break down where those tariffs, where indeed the trade has come from by air in recent years, it's largely things like electronics, nuclear parts. The thing that actually a lot of people have focused on recently, because it's something that the government has been trying to clamp down on, it's clothing and knitwear, fast fashion, basically. But that's a small segment. It's the other bits you might have to be worried about. If you're in the US, electronics, nuclear parts, technically speaking, tariffs do apply to these things. But for most of the rest of the trade, we've yet to see, and it depends, obviously, on what negotiations happen next.
Ed Conway there. Well, let's bring in now our US correspondent, James Matthews. Well, Ed was just saying how it's a fast-moving story. What's the latest you can bring us from Washington, James?
Yeah, hi. Well, we're still waiting for the readout from the Trump-Xi call, which was due, we were told, to take place today. The Washington-Beijing axis, Sophie, is very much at the centre of this, both playing, I think, a careful game. They both see the danger of an all-out trade war. And I think both are endeavouring to avoid that kind of brinkmanship. Beijing's response has been robust, but interestingly measured and targeted, I think. They're focusing on oil products, Trump's favoured industry. That allows Beijing to say that it's being tough on Trump. But what they have done is to lay off other imports, like agricultural imports, for example. So the Chinese do appear to be building in this wriggle room, space for manoeuvring, space for negotiation. Interestingly, they have placed increased restrictions on metals, clearly keeping a close eye on Trump and his inner circle. It's these restrictions on metals, that's the kind of stuff used in smartphones. They're clearly targeting big tech, the tech industry. Bear in mind that the tech bros and those who run the industry in this country, they have the ear very much of Donald Trump. So presumably the Chinese hope is that they will lean and use their influence on Donald Trump in terms of his next move. It's a test for Trump, no doubt, as he pursues a path with the big adversary. Cordial at this stage, but we'll see how it pans out in the long term. As I say, he's due to speak to President Xi today. His economic coercion has worked with the Mexicans, with the Canadians. Early wins, as Donald Trump would claim, certainly. This current engagement is different with the Chinese. It's a rangefinder for the relationship that will develop, which of course has far more riding on it than just trade and tariffs actually in the short term.
Yeah, it absolutely does. James, thank you very much indeed. James Matthews there in Washington for us. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The former Labour Minister Caroline Flint and the journalist and broadcaster Daisy McAndrew. Great to have you both with us. We've been discussing US-UK trade deals. What do you guys think? Will it happen? Is it something we would even want if it did?
Oh, I think people would definitely want it. Partly because everybody that you've been talking to tonight, Sophie, has talked about there's the issue of the deal itself and then there's the politics of the deal and the way that it looks and the way that it makes those individual politicians look, whether it makes them look strong or weak, popular or unpopular. And I've been fascinated just in the last hour. JL Partners, Scarlett Maguire, has been tweeting about a new poll that they've done on the impact that what Donald Trump has been up to in the last few days and couple of weeks has had on his popularity in this country, not in America. And it is fascinating. It has done him a lot of good, even amongst Labour voters. 1 in 5 Labour voters saying they're now more positive about Donald Trump because they might not agree with what he's done, but he's doing something, unlike a lot of politicians who look incapable of getting a deal done. Not surprisingly, a majority of Nigel Farage's voters think that Donald Trump is better than they used to think he is, and a considerable number of Conservatives. So I think that tells a message of how looking tough and getting deals and squashing your opponents is popular.
People like a winner.
They like a winner and a deal maker. Yeah.
Do you think it could have the same impact on Keir Starmer? I mean, I guess this is a guy who's bet everything on growth, and this could be absolutely key for him in achieving that.
I think the environment's right for a deal between the US and the UK. For the reasons said earlier, I mean, we aren't in the same situation as other countries in their relationship, Mexico, Canada, China, the EU. You know, the deficit there for the US is very clear. But where you've got a sort of, a much more balanced exchange in terms of imports, exports, then it's been ready for a deal for a long time. The question is where's the politics to get it over the road? And the truth is, even then we were hearing about with China and America, there's a bit of a pick and mix, selective about what you go for and don't go for. So both sides can come out, I wouldn't say smelling of roses, but with something that plays to their own home audiences as well. And I think, for Starmer, given, the last few months, but particularly since the new year, growth is the agenda, that has to be about keeping alive exports. We talk about a service economy in this country, and that's important. But it's what we make and what we export that is really clear in this as well. And if he can do a deal, why shouldn't we have a deal that's good for the UK with the US and work on other deals with the EU? I don't see it as Kim Darroch suggests, that somehow you can't do one without the other. I think we've got to get out of that mind space and move forward. And it is interesting about this. For the public, they're looking at leaders who actually make a decision and lead. They're not interested in the thousands of negotiators behind the scene working it out line by line. They want to see action. And one thing's for clear with Trump, with Mexico and Canada, it wasn't necessarily about the response being about them going for a trade punish against the US. It was actually about other bigger goals, which is about the drugs coming across border, about undocumented migrants. Because at the end of the day, those things have an economy, have an effect on the economy and social life of America, just as much as trade.
And it was also about the President of Mexico and Justin Trudeau looking, swallowing their pride and phoning up Trump and giving Trump what he wanted. Because actually, when you look at the detail of what Canada's offering, saying this new $1 billion dollars that they're going to be pouring into the borders, it was all happening anyway. There's a lot of
haven't flagged it.
There's a lot of smoke and mirrors, and there's a lot of bending the knee and kissing Donald Trump's and all the rest of it in order to get it over the line. So there is a lot more argy-bargy going on than Donald Trump would have you believe. But that's what he's good at.
I think this would be, if it happens and, there's a way to go, and there'll be certainly voices off in the UK saying, we can't do this, we can't do that. If Starmer can pull off a deal with Trump, I think it's good.
And he probably will have to give something that feels, almost too much, but for the greater good.
And also swallow a bit of pride potentially as well.
Pride. See the bigger picture.
He's been doing an awful lot of saying how great Donald Trump is, which, let's be honest, is not necessarily what he'd been saying 5 years ago.
Trump is a disruptor, and there's other leaders around the world who are like that. Putin is another one, but he's a disruptor, and he cuts through the normal polite behaviour of how the conventional way and the orthodoxy of how these things work. Does he always get it right? Probably not. Is it more complicated than that? Yes, it is. But if he gets a result, whatever is the result, and it's good for America, he's done the job.
But has he got the political note? He's Starmer. The one thing he has stumbled on in the past is the politics rather than the managerial. And this is deeply political.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And thanks both very much. Really interesting chat. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, we'll hear from the parents campaigning for a change in the law to deal with people who cause death while driving unlicensed. But next, a group of medical experts claim there is no evidence the former nurse Lucy Letby murdered babies. We'll have the detail.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News Get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out. The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Hello, welcome back. Now, the senior Conservative MP, Sir David Davis, today called the conviction of Lucy Letby one of the major injustices of modern times. He was appearing at a news conference organised by her legal team, who say they've reviewed medical records and found no evidence of murders committed by the nurse. Now, Lucy Letby is currently serving 15 whole life orders after being convicted of murdering 7 babies and trying to kill 7 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Here's our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi.
We did not find any murders. In all cases, death or injury were due to natural causes or just bad medical care.
An unprecedented intervention. A panel of world-renowned paediatric specialists say their review of the evidence shows there's no proof Lucy Letby caused any deaths or injuries to babies in her care. The former nurse is serving 15 whole life terms for murdering 7 infants and attempting to murder 7 others between June 2015 and June 2016.
There was evidence to suggest that not only was there problems with the medical care, but there were problems in the hospital with respect to staffing and organisation and infrastructure and plumbing and all those issues.
At Letby's trial, prosecutors pointed to skin discoloration in several of the victims as evidence that air had been injected into their veins. But the panel laid out alternative causes of death in many of the cases at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
The main premise of the whole of the prosecution's case in relation to air embolism is wrong and should never have been said. And B, we know how this baby died, or we know how this baby collapsed, and it wasn't at the hands of one individual.
Letby is now represented by a different legal team, and 2 previous attempts at appealing her conviction have failed.
Dr. Dowie Evans, the lead prosecution witness, whose evidence has come under close scrutiny, is standing by his testimony. He says he's concerned that some people are getting their facts wrong.
The Criminal Cases Review Commission has announced it will now review Letby's case, but warned that speculation has been driven by some parties who have only had a partial view of the evidence.
It's vital that the Criminal Cases Review Commission reviews this evidence and any other evidence as carefully and as thoroughly as possible, because there isn't going to be another chance for many years. It will take months for them to review the case, and it will take several months after that, I dare say, for an appeal to be arranged.
There is an ongoing public inquiry into the murders Lucy Letby has been convicted of and how the hospital responded. The former nurse was convicted after a 5-year investigation and 2 trials. For the parents of the victims in need of closure, the panel's findings ask yet more questions that need to be answered. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Well, let's talk now to Caroline and Daisy. And look, it's such a difficult story to talk about because at the centre of it are babies who were killed, who lost their lives, and parents who will never get over it. So obviously there's so much sensitivity that needs to go in around this, but this is quite an interesting intervention by David Davis. Well, what do you make of it?
Well, of course, we haven't got all... I haven't.
Exactly,
I can't,
yeah.
you know, prejudge or judge or whatever all the situation, all the facts of it. We know that there were 2 criminal trials that went ahead and she was convicted. We know, obviously, from reports, well, I know from reports that there was... it pointed to both medical evidence was given, but also where she was at certain times, on certain shifts, a pattern that emerged. Compared to obviously other staff that were there. We understand there was also circumstantial evidence in her own home about thoughts about killing and so on. So there's a whole number of things that, you know, took place in those trials. But clearly, you know, it is right within the system if there is a different argument, a counter-argument on about particularly the medical nature of what happened to these babies and why they died, then that needs to be assessed. But we don't know what the outcome will be. And the point there is that we're hearing one voice at the moment. There will be other voices as the criminal cases review goes forward. What is clear, and I think this is really important for the families who lost children or who had children who were in danger of dying as well, is they actually find the answers to their questions about what happened. If it's not Lucy Letby, then there is clearly something else within that hospital that was fundamentally going wrong. And that has to be addressed.
I mean, that's what these experts are saying, that they don't believe it was Lucy Letby. They believe it was a whole series of medical problems, of lack of professionalism. And we know that our infant mortality rates in this country are terrible compared to the rest of Europe. You know, we're right down at the bottom of the table, and we've known it for years and years. I mean, personally, I had 2 terrible births where a lot of both consultants and midwives made serious mistakes and didn't admit it. And this is what happens with the NHS. You know, Matthew Syed's book, Black Box Thinking, his conclusion from looking at all these different industries is industries like aviation learn from their mistakes. Industries like the NHS cover up their mistakes. And that was written years ago. And government, departments and secretaries of state have known that this is a problem of culture within the NHS, and it's still there.
You see, that's the thing I think that is actually really important to say, that, look, as Karen says, we don't know, we didn't sit through the whole trial of Lucy Letby, but there is clearly issues with how the NHS covers things up, and I agree, actually, particularly, I think, around birth and babies.
And it's why, I mean, there's been several inquiries into maternity services across the country, and I think it's why the government have chosen to keep actually within its targets areas around maternity care and improving that. But again, what's really important in this, and in any sort of situation where, people's, lives are at risk, they're at risk because they've got potentially cancer or something else that needs treated, or potential risks at childbirth. But there also has to deal with the risk that you do not want a closed culture. You want an open culture. You want transparency. You want people who speak up to be heard. And, of course, that was another factor in all of this, that there were doctors who were raising questions. They didn't know quite what the answer was to it, but they thought something was going wrong. And some of those clinicians felt they weren't being heard. So it is important that, I'd love to feel that we could never have anything happen like this, and we've had other examples in the health service going forward, and I could never 100% promise that. But what you want to make sure is the cultures that exist within organisations are open and transparent, and learning happens from it. All my time as an MP, when I dealt with casework involving the health service, more than anything else, from families, was not necessarily... They wanted accountability and they wanted learning from it, so nobody else had to go through what they went through.
And the other thing I'd like to say is, hooray for David Davis and other parliamentarians, particularly backbenchers who take on these cases. He's done that, along with many others, for the Post Office, for the Chinook crash. And you see that there is a real power in the backbench voice, who decides... He has decided there's a miscarriage of justice. We don't know. But he's making a real difference, and I think that's to be applauded.
And it's right to be heard. It's right to hear that anyway. Thank you both very much indeed. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, the parents of 14-year-old Harry Parker tell us why they want a change in the law. Welcome back. Now, Sky News understands the government is looking at tougher laws around driving without a licence after the death of a 14-year-old boy from Swindon outside of school. Harry Parker's parents' campaign has been discussed in Parliament today, as our political correspondent Amanda Acast reports.
He was a lovely lad, full of life, football fanatic. He was Daddy's boy.
It's every parent's worst nightmare. Adam and Kelly's son Harry was hit and killed by a car on the way to school. He was just 14 years old.
We had to make the decision to turn the life support machine off. Harry was in the middle, me and his dad was led side by side, holding him so tight and holding his heartbeat, and we felt the very last beat.
The driver of the car didn't have a licence, insurance or stop at the scene. But 2 years after Harry's death in November 2022, the charges were dropped. The Crown Prosecution Service said there wasn't enough evidence the collision could reasonably have been avoided and therefore the driving was careless.
We're still fighting for justice and it's not right. You shouldn't send your child off to school planning on what you're going to cook him that evening, and someone just hits him.
There's no current national data on unlicensed drivers, though past research by the Department of Transport estimated they commit nearly 1 in 10 of all motoring offences, and there could be as many as 470,000 on the roads. In 2006, the Labour government created a new offence of causing death while driving without a licence or insurance. But in 2013, the Supreme Court ruled prosecutors still had to prove the driving was at fault. Now the Parkers are fighting to change that, with their local MP making the case in Parliament today.
What we must do is ensure that no other family has to endure what they have been through. The Harry Parker Bill seeks to close the dangerous gaps in our legal system and impose real-world consequences on those who choose to drive without a licence. Those who choose to drive without a valid licence will be deemed careless.
It's quite rare for these kind of backbench 10-minute rule bills to end up becoming actual legislation. But it seems the government has been listening. I understand they're going to adopt the Harry Parker Bill as part of the forthcoming road safety strategy as an urgent priority.
Even things like that,
For Adam and Kelly, who came to Parliament to watch, it was an emotional day.
When he actually read it out, I just started crying. I welled up, and it made it very, very real how far we're actually taking this, and that people are actually really, really listening, and it's comforting.
Kelly and Adam are now just hoping that Harry's legacy will help protect other children. Amanda Acast, Sky News, Swindon.
Well, let's talk to Amanda now. You've been speaking to the department. Is this actually going to happen then?
Well, it does certainly look like it's something that they want to do, and certainly it's been a long time coming. The previous Labour governments were very concerned about the number of unlicensed drivers on the roads. They drafted this legislation which went into law, making it a specific offence to cause death when driving without a licence, punishable by up to 2 years in prison. But then there was this Supreme Court case in 2013 which effectively said that the way it was written was pretty unclear, and essentially ruled that prosecutors would still have to find fault with the driving in order to have a successful prosecution, which made it pretty useless as a law, because then if you had that kind of clear evidence, well, they'd be prosecuted as careless or dangerous driving anyway. That's a situation the Parkers really want to change, and certainly understand from the Department of Transport that they do want to do this. They've got this road safety strategy that they're working on. It's the first in 10 years. Louise Haigh, the former Transport Secretary, was pretty passionate about it. She talked about her kind of frustration about the lack of progress in trying to bring down the number of fatalities on the roads. Now it's Heidi Alexandra, of course, but I think this is something that also is quite close to her. She's a Swindon MP herself, so she knows all about this. And although they've had a lot on their plate recently, the Department of Transport with airports and so on, I think it is something that really is a priority now. They are working on this and other areas of the law that needs to be updated. There still isn't a timeline, though, on when they're going to actually get this done. But I think something like this is quite a simple change that I think could be quite a quick win for them. And certainly so much heartbreak caused to people like the Parkers like this. I think it's something that they could do quite simply.
OK, thanks very much indeed, Amanda. Well, this story could well feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the chief leader writer at The Observer, that's Sonia Soda, and the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj. Right, let's chat to Caroline and Daisy again, shall we? Daisy, what's your reaction to the story?
I think that it's a really good story to cover and good story to get. And I think it's absolutely right that this could be an easy and quick change that the government can do. It doesn't cost money, unlike so many other new policies, that you're basically fixing something that didn't work. But there is a much bigger picture, not necessarily about deaths caused by uninsured drivers, but about the number of uninsured drivers we have on our roads, which has increased hugely recently. And it is no coincidence that the price of insurance has gone up 82% since the pandemic. You know, that's 4 times the rate of inflation, and there is a correlation there between those two things. So I think there is a bigger picture within the insurance market and the impact that those costs are having on the number of people who are taking this very, very dangerous decision to drive uninsured.
Yeah, you were talking about the number of unlicensed drivers as well.
Yeah, I mean, you saw the figures on there. They reckon there's around 470,000 unlicensed drivers. So they're not even getting to the point of getting the insurance. They're not actually got a driving licence to start with. And, you know, I think, again, it's worthwhile government thinking about, well, who are these people? You know, are there any patterns there in terms of who these people are and why they haven't got a licence? Is it because it's just they think they can't afford to go through the process of getting a driving licence, getting the insurance? But that cannot be an excuse. I mean, you know, we talk a lot about people going out on the streets with knives, with guns, and what should be done. And there's lots of different laws being set up to tackle that. When you get into a car and you haven't got a licence, and you haven't got insurance, I don't care who that person might say, but I know how to drive a car, I can do this. You're not licensed, you're not insured. It's about the social contract we have with the state. And you might as well say, I'm getting in here, and it's like a weapon. It's like something. And successive governments have tied themselves up in knots on this. What they have to really make sure this time is whatever they come up with, it's going to work in the courts. Because, again, what's happened with previous law, the courts in different ways have made an argument for, well, we can't do this because we can't show that they actually caused the accident, even though they are unlicensed and uninsured. And they've got to stress test whatever they do next, because there's no point going down the route again where whatever they come up with can't be actioned by the courts.
But I think there is one other issue also, and I'm not for a minute excusing people who don't have licences or don't have insurance, but also if we look at rural areas where, you know, local transport has got a lot worse in the last few years. And you do hear from many people in those communities saying, I can't afford not to drive, I can't afford to drive, and I can't get a job without driving. So there are lots of issues going on.
And lots of young people in those rural areas do get a licence because there's no transport to get that. And the death rate and the collisions and accidents by young drivers, not because they're doing anything wrong, but they're just novice drivers.
On country roads. Yeah, absolutely right.
Lots to talk about, clearly. Thanks both very much indeed. Still to come on Politics Hub. From JFK to Trump, we look at the enduring influence of Rupert Murdoch.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, a special report into the state of care homes in the UK. Plus, the new NHS trial using artificial intelligence to screen for breast cancer. We'll hear from TV presenter and campaigner Juliet Bradbury. And we'll also be meeting the 16-year-old swapping GCSEs for Silicon Valley with his new tech startup. And the residents of a Norfolk village who say they're being terrorised by escaped pigs. Well, that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
In the last 5 years, more than 13,000 farmers have left agriculture in the UK.
Is it going to be viable for the future?
No farmers, no food! The frustration, the anger, the fact that so many of them are at risk of going bust has now become too much.
You've got to keep hope because one day it's going to be okay.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
It's scary what's happening in the country.
It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale. Having the police speak to us so starkly right in the middle of the riot showed just how serious the situation was. The water on board the barge contaminated with Legionella bacteria, an outbreak that was first revealed by Sky News. There have been questions for months over whether the support offered to asylum seekers on the Bivvy is sufficient.
A cruel place to put human beings.
From busy cities to rural communities, we spend every day reporting on how big decisions impact real people. The last smoke and steam rises into the sky above Blast Furnace 4.
Today is a day in history in Port Talbot.
The closure means more than 2,000 job losses.
It just seems madness.
It is a highly contagious infection. South West Water did apologise again.
This is the revenge porn helpline.
They're helping terrified victims.
You've been a victim of a very common type of online crime known as sextortion. We're making things better for people.
Stonehenge became the latest victim of Just Stop Oil.
Now I can say I've been to the orange Stonehenge.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
The Premier League is exclusively on Peacock. Two of the league's biggest clubs find themselves at the wrong end of the table.
And the mood turns extremely sour.
Desperately chasing a win to turn their season around.
It's a beautiful finish.
Tottenham Hotspur.
To Eriksen. Back toward Amma.
Manchester United. This is the Premier League. February 16, only on Peacock.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, Donald Trump's been signing a stream of executive orders since re-entering the White House. But last night, it was someone else in the Oval Office who caught our attention. It was this man, Rupert Murdoch. He was watching on as the president was scribbling his signatures. His presence was not without a little bit of awkwardness, though, because Donald Trump was asked by a reporter to respond to a headline in the Wall Street Journal, the same Wall Street Journal that he owns, which condemned his tariff policy as the dumbest trade war in history. But this was far from being Rupert Murdoch's first time next to the seat of power. This is him back in 1961 meeting President Kennedy at the White House when he was just beginning to build his news empire in Australia. That's 44 years ago. Right, let's chat to Caroline and Daisy, shall we? I can't believe those two pictures, 1961.
I didn't recognise him in the younger one at all.
It looks quite different.
Did you say that was 1961?
I think that's right. Is that right?
More than 40 odd years.
It is. That was the year I was born, and I'm 63. So
but not anymore. You're now 41.
Yes,
so that's
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah. Good point.
Sorry.
My maths is terrible, I'll be honest. It's not my strong suit. It's really
It's
not
all right.
my
I've
strong
lost
suit.
20 years, so it's all right with me.
You're happy.
You'll take it. You'll totally take it.
I will. But what a life. I mean, people are talking about Trump as a disruptor, but, whatever you feel about him, he was a disruptor to the way both print and broadcast journalism was brought to us. Going from those days with sort of Wapping down and Wapping and everything, but also who would have thought that people would pay to have a dish put on their roof so they could watch television and pay for view. And, of course, he has, in some ways led from the front, and it's affected broadcast and print journalism across the board, how he operates. And people might not always like it, but actually he's been a force to be reckoned with.
It's also the fact that he's in there, in the White House. I mean, that's a statement of power still, isn't it?
Of course. And then, gets a sort of, kicking from Trump, which is very typical on both fronts. But, they're both big enough and ugly enough to take the kickings, aren't they? I mean, it just reminded me, it was only a few months ago where he was paying out, was it 800 million or something, when Fox News had to, they were saying that Trump's, election was stolen, and then they lost that court case and so on. So if you think of all the machinations that we've been through over the last few years of, does Murdoch love Trump? Does he not love him? He didn't love paying out the millions and millions in that court case. But he's still there.
And he's in mainstream media. I thought Donald Trump was all about, the new kids on the block, but,
Well, there you go. And of course, I think, isn't there, I understand, a court case involving the kids and the legacy of who will get one? I mean, the parallels with Succession and Logan Roy just are, Fact is stranger than fiction.
It's impossible not to think of Succession, isn't it? It's true.
No, absolutely. And of course, it's still happening on this side of the pond as well. Every time Rupert Murdoch's in town, he has his famous summer parties. You'll get all the political leaders, no matter what colour they are, no matter what party they represent, going along, to show their respect.
We're out of time. So have you both on the show. That's it from us tonight. I will see you tomorrow at 7.